The Journeyman Chapter 9. Jared worked steadily for 2 days. First, he washed the walls all over with a pink that looked as if crushed raspberries had been used in the making. So soft and lovely a color it was. Then he laced the edges of the room, the line near the ceiling, the line above the chair back, and the line around the doors, with a looping green vine. It was a sturdy, healthy vine that looked capable of sending out more and more branches. On the open spaces of the walls he set flowers and a sunburst. So he brought to the north room all he had remembered through the years of the home that had been his first, the cheer of it and the grace of it, with the tendrils that bound his heart to it. On the evening of the second day he surveyed with pride the simple design that enlivened the walls. During the past months he had turned carpenter and farmer, but his hands had lost none of their skill. It was proof of yet another of Mr. Toppin's oft-made sayings, the more you do, the richer you become, and the finer your work will be, for that much more goes into it. Yes, Mr. Toppin, Jared had said, as he had after all such remarks, which were his due as an apprentice. Odd that he recalled them now and recognized their truth. The Thaxters had few words with which to voice their pleasure when they stood in the room and let its gracious beauty unfold them. Mother Thaxter, looking at the walls, thought of the time when she had held Jared to life by telling him he was needed in the world. She had not known then that his hands would touch common things to loveliness, marking them bear bud, blossom, and fruit. Making them bear bud, blossom, and fruit. Everywhere during this dark year of cold and famine, the cry was the same. Short crops, sickness, hard times. Yet here was Jared Austen bringing comfort to the countryside through beauty, warming a household, feeding its hungry hearts. There's food and fire there, Jared, Mother Thaxter had said quietly, but how 'tis done, I know not. Father Thaxter nodded his head slowly. It does me good to see such work, he said. It'll do me even better when winter imprisons us. You used to feel the cold so when you were a little one. Mother Thaxter looked long at Jared, adding, and something that wasn't cold used to make you shiver, but now? I'm warmed through and through, Jared said with a smile. Then he leaned over and started to pack up his kit, wondering where it would next be unfolded. That night, Jared Austen hung a black scarf. That night, Nancy Austen hung a black scarf on a tree. The morning wind billowed it, and Jared, saddling the gray one for an early start, saw it first. Mother Thaxter, he cried, hurrying into the house. There's a black scarf on the tree. She dropped the spoon in which she was stirring the porridge and turned to Jared. Her face paled quickly. That's death, Jared. There's nothing any of us can do now. I must go to her. No, Jared, she said firmly. You might take the fever yourself. You might take it to others. She laid her hand on his arm as if to restrain him. I must go. I'm not afraid for myself, and I promise you, Mother Thaxter, I'll keep away from others till there is no danger. Jared could be as firm as granite when his mind was settled on a thing, and Mother Thaxter knew there was no withholding him. She put her arms around him then, as if he were still a reedy little boy. Jared, my dear one, she breathed softly, when you were just a youngster you gave your heart to God. 'Tis his love guiding you now, and I know he'll guide you right. Jared nodded. That he will indeed. She kissed him warmly, then gave him breakfast. There was a tender farewell with Mother Thaxter, and a lively one with the rest of the family. Jared promised to come back with news of Jeanette before the winter set in. Then he mounted the gray one and turned her head up the hill to his father's house. Nancy Austen opened the door that had known no knocking hand for a month. At the sight of a stranger on the stone, she passed her hand in bewilderment across her eyes, wondering if she was seeing things. So heavy had been the loneliness of the past weeks. No, no, you must not come here. Don't you see the mark I made on the door? There's sickness within, she said, closing the door, for dearly as she would have loved to talk with a peddler, she knows she must not. Jared made no move except to slide one booted foot against the door to keep it from closing. Nancy Austin, don't you know me? He asked. I've come to help you. She leaned against the door, confused and puzzled, her face haggard and worn, her body thin. Somewhere behind her stood a pale boy with heavy black hair and dark eyes. She brushed her hand across her face, again as if she were brushing time away. Then a smile twisted her lips. It's Jared, she had said hoarsely. Little Jared. Her hand went limp on the door, and she backed away from it into the room. Jared entered. The house was heavy with the oppressive sense of sickness. Is it merry or thankful? He asked quietly. Oh, Jared, it's both of them. I did all I could, but it was like fighting a forest fire. I couldn't stop it. She reached forward and clutched his hand. God must have sent you, for no one around here dares enter this house. She led him across the room and opened the door of a small bedroom. Jared stepped across the threshold and caught his breath. With a sob, he had longed to see Thankful and Mary in life, eager and joyous as he had remembered them. Now he saw them in death, white and stiff and still, marked by their illness. But though the years had brought them to maidenhood, death had returned them to childhood. So small they seemed, so innocent. Nancy was leaning against the doorpost, sobbing and sobbing. Jared turned quickly to her. He knew the relief of tears and let her weep, but with his arms about her. During all the time Nancy Austin had been fighting for their lives, she had not once dared let sorrow have its way with her. Now, with comfort at hand, she could loose the floodgates of her will. I tried last night, she said between sobs, to bury them, but I couldn't. Jared led her to a chair and made her comfortable. He talked quietly with her until anguish eased itself into sorrow, and sorrow began groping dimly along a way of peace. Then he left her. He found his way to his father's workshop, and there began measuring boards for a coffin. The pale, wide-eyed boy followed him. Young Eben, Jared said, taking a small, rough hand between his, can you find me a piece of soapstone in the old quarry near the woods? He described its size with gestures and added, a little higher than it is wide. The boy nodded. Then fetch it here, and I'll show you how we can cut it. We can cut through sorrow. Jared soon made the simple pine box that was large enough for two bodies that were wasted and thin. Then he turned to the stone Eben had found for him. Working carefully with a sharp-pointed tool, he inscribed letters on the stone. When he finished, he drew the wondering boy to him. Have you learned to read yet? Jared asked. The boy inclined his head. Thankful taught me last winter. Then read these words. The boy bent forward and read slowly. Thankful and Mary Austin. How friendly seems the vast unknown, since they have entered there.
Could you imagine Kira and another girlfriend of ours dying?
Kira and you. Eben looked up quickly at Jared. A gleam like the light from a small candle was in his face. Is that true, Jared? Jared nodded. Even as little girls, they loved God with all their hearts. I remembered it well. They've just gone ahead of us to heaven, to be there to greet us. He laid a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. Now let me see if you can wield a spade as a farmer should. They crossed the field together, and Eben pointed out the curved mound near an apple tree where Nancy had laid the boy's father. They struck their spades to the earth and dug, and though the frost had firmed the topsoil, they were soon below it in the soft earth. Young Eben worked well, with strength of body and knowing hand, more than once glancing up at Jared for a word of praise which sent him back to the task with new vigor. At sundown, the half-brothers and Nancy Austen carried the pine box to the deep trench. They laid it in gently, as though careful not to stir the slumber of the little girls. Then Jared and Eben shoveled the earth back and made the mound smooth. The stone was fixed in its place at the head of the mound. Jared knelt first, and then Nancy dropped to her knees beside him, and the boy beside her. Jared looked to Nancy for the prayer, but her face was sad and heavy. Her eyes were dry, and her lips set as if to enforce bravery. But Jared knew that just then her heart was no soil from which prayer might grow. So he lifted his head and prayed aloud, committing Thankful and Mary to their Heavenly Father. Amen, Nancy said, as his words faded into the twilight. Later that evening, after supper and after the boy had been tucked into the trundle bed, Jared sat along with Nancy Austen by the hearth. He talked with her about the farm and the crops, giving her advice here and comfort there, so neatly interwoven that Nancy thought it was her own mind speaking and felt stronger for the strength in herself. Sometimes the frost heaves at our walls, and we have to build them again, and sometimes we build our lives up again, Jared said. But there are plenty of stones in the fields, and there's plenty of vigor in the spirit of man. You and young Eben have fine land to work with, Nancy Austen. She smiled. And we've got spirit, too. We'll keep the farm going and make it thrive. Jared rose to go. Jared, she said with a boldness that surprised him, when I sell the apple crop this September, can I hire you to do my walls for me? You can, but I'll not take your money. I'll do your walls with the best that's in me. And I'll pay you for what I get. It will be the apples. That will do it. All right then, Nancy Austen. I'll be back before all the leaves have fallen. He was soon riding off into the night. An easy journey it would have been to reach the Christies by morning, especially since the gray one was so fresh. But Jared rode slowly and stopped along the way to rest for the night. Then, when morning came, he left the road and followed the brook into the woods, finding a place where it widened into a pool with a sandy bottom. He tethered the gray one nearby and took off all his clothes, then plunged into the water and scrubbed himself with the sand. Garment by garment, all but his boots, he took his clothing into the pool with him, washing each piece vigorously, then rinsing where the water ran fresh over the stones. He hung his clothes on a nearby tree to dry. Sitting quietly on a stone, he let the summer wind and the high sun dry his body. He knew that properly he should have burned the clothes he had worn into a house where spotted fever was. But he had nothing else with him to wear, and little else at Corbin Christie's, so he turned to the cleansing action of water and waited for the sun to do its work. It was evening when he got back. Quietly he took the gray one's saddle and bridle into the barn and turned her loose in the pasture. And as quietly he went into the house and left a note for Corbin, telling him not to look for him for a while longer. Then with the hoe and some bread and cheese done up with a handkerchief, he sought the high clearing. There would be a shelter among the trees, water at the spring, he knew, berries and roots to augment his small store of food, and he would keep his promise to Mother Thaxter not to go near anyone for a while after being in a house where the fever had been. He slept on the edge of a clearing and, waking at the first streak of dawn, saw the seed he had planted a week ago, like a fine green carpet before him. He hoed it then, small as it was, and he hoed it every day during the growing weather of that strange summer. The heat of the sun got into the cool earth, and though the nights were cold, Still frosty in the low places, the corn in the clearing grew tall and green. The frosts in the early and later part of June had taken many a man's third and fourth plantings. Now, though, the weather had at last swung into a stride of warmth. There had been no rain for weeks, and no dew either. The few crops that had escaped the frosts looked pitifully meager as they struggled out of the dry, dusty earth. The grass in meadow and pasture was still light and backward, and when haying days should have been well underway, few farmers saw any sense in cutting. So widespread were the weather conditions that the weekly papers had begun to find them a chief topic of news, sometimes in an endeavor to give advice for the planting of alternative crops. As the season advanced, the harvest was a gloomy prospect, despite the rains that had come at last. But the Yankee farmer could be trusted to be ingenious. Hard times found people responding to them in the land in different ways. There were some farmers whose work with the land made them philosophical and unemotional. They stuck with the soil in the same determined way their fathers had, braving the terrors of the wilderness and depredations of the Indians, because desire was strong within them to be masters in a free land. There were those who, brave enough when things were right, found the strain of hard times and the prospect of harder ones not to their liking. Those were men who became fretful and restive, hearkening to tales that itinerants told of broad lands in the opening west, lands of rich earth where the sun warmed it well and the winter ceased as it should in March. There was yet another group of men, a small but dangerous group, who had lost heavily but could still spend their time in idle gossip. Ignorant and cowardly, they became easily alarmed at any phenomenon and sank into superstition. All the strength they should have been using with sickle or flail, had the weather allowed, went to their tongues as they talked about the cruel times and tried to find a reason for them. We were all right till that painter fellow came our way, Ephraim Twist muttered to a group assembled one day at Dan True's. No one has seen him for a long while now, Dan put in, seeking to keep the peace. I saw him yesterday, a bearded man said, wiping his lips as he put down his mug. He was coming out of Christie's woods, and as sure as I'm standing here, he was talking with the devil, writing his name in his book. Oh, come now, put in Dan True. Yes, the bearded man went on, and the devil was that pleased with his bargain he jumped right up in the air and disappeared. Just let there be one more freeze in this spell of growing weather, Twist said darkly, and we'll know where to lay the blame. Corbin Christie came often to the inn these days, but not to hearken to the talk of the discontents. He was too full of a need for action to worry about mere talk, but his ears were quick to catch news of the West. The frosts that had taken his plantings had left him with little to do, and a restlessness was coursing with the red blood in his veins. If it was true that the West was such a land, he told himself, if he could be sure that was true, he would sell his place for whatever anyone would give him and ride young Meteor out to the Western Reserve. That's a long way for a horse to go who's had thin pasture this summer, Dan True said restrainingly. Corbin shook his head. I've gone hungry myself, but young Meteor hasn't. He's as fit as ever he was, for he's had the hay and grain the others haven't. Then he laughed. Always keep a means of flight, is what the highwayman said, and it's a good saying. True winked one eye at Corbin. That lass of yours, she'd like to go west too, I expect? Corbin was silent for a moment. It's an odd thing, Dan, but I've got out of thinking of marrying. I've had so much else on my mind. She won't go long unwed, True reminded him. No other man is going to have her while I'm around, Corbin said hotly. He was soon riding home at a good speed, stopping off at Dunkley's on the way. They were busy in the fields, haying the light crop that was no more than a cutting of grass. Eliza and the young children were working as hard as John, not letting as much of a wisp go off the wind, and Jeanette was gleaning after them. Corbin laughed aloud. "'Tisn't worth the time you're putting on it, John Dunkley." "Maybe not," Dunkley said, wiping his hot face. "But if it's all we're going to get, the stock will think it worth it when January comes." Corbin waved to Jeanette, who had come trudging up the dusty lane, a bundle of short hay in her arms. "Ho, lass! Would you like to come west with me?" She quickened her steps until she stood beside him. "Corbin," she panted, laying one hand on young Meteor's heaving flank, "what are you saying?" "I've a notion to go west." "And leave your land?" The horror of such action was wide writ on her tired face. "Leave this mad weather," he said. She reached up and caught his hand. "But Corbin, we've got to beat the weather, the way our fathers beat the wilderness." Young Meteor plunged forward, and Jeanette stepped swiftly sidewards to avoid his heavy feet. Corbin reined him in. Then wheeled quickly and galloped down the lane, taking a stone wall in his stride. He raced across his own fields. The dust swirled around him. Jeanette put up her hand to her eyes. "Don't mind him now," Eliza said behind her. "Hard times strike all men differently. Some turn to drink, some to restlessness." Jeanette bent over to pick up the hay she had lost from her bundle. "Wait till you see that mess of blackberries Reuben and Delight have brought from the woods," Eliza said comfortingly. At least they're growing still." Jeanette looked up and smiled into Eliza's face. "I'm hungry, Eliza." The tone was that of a little girl waiting overlong for supper. Eliza laughed. "We'll know those words well before the winter's out, but at least one of us will have to say we're starving. At least none of us will have to say we're starving." Corbin found Jared at the house and greeted him with pleasure, for weeks had passed since their last meeting. "I knew you were near when I saw the gray one in the pasture," Corbin said, "but I figured you had your own work to attend, so I made no bother of finding you. I've been tending my corn. How's it coming on?" Jared smiled proudly. "The rain and these warm days have given it a great leap," he said eagerly. "We'll harvest a goodly number of bushels, Corbin, at this rate." "We?" Corbin laughed, not unkindly. "You keep your mite, Jared. I've a mind to go west, where the land is wider. These fiddling fields and fickle weather just don't suit my fancy." "But you've cleared your land," Jared exclaimed, "and built your house and found your wife. You can't go away now." There was nothing like crossing Corbin to make him set as a flint. "Can't I? We'll see," he said bitterly. "I'll take the lass along with me, and we'll build again in a land where a man can call his soul his own. Jeanette's New Hampshire, born and bred. Do you think she'll leave the hills for the plains that easily?" "She will if I say so," Corbin answered quickly. The next morning, it was as if Corbin had forgotten their talk of the West, for the day was hot and the crops were reaching forward. He worked hard in his fields, hoeing his potatoes, and with Jared's help and persuasion, he even started haying a small meadow. The air had a refreshing stillness to it, for the warm sun and recent rains had given such an upsurgence to the grass that the cattle were feeding greedily and the lowing that had marked their hunger since spring had ceased. After they had finished their work together, Jared went up through the woods to the clearing. No one but Corbin knew of this venture of his, and no one laughed at it. Some day, Jared thought, he would bring Jeanette up and show her the green stalks waving so boldly, the only corn stalks in the countryside. Then he decided that perhaps he'd keep it a secret until the grain had come. Twilight came over the land, and Jared caressed the corn as he walked through it. Hoeing it so frequently had hastened its maturity, and silky tassels were beginning to show. He would hoe no more until the ears had formed. Week after week of growing weather had gone by, and August was nearly over. The hard work of the farmers and the luxuriant flourishing of the past few weeks had given a different face to the countryside. Men were freer with each other, sharing less of foreboding and more of hope. The strange tales about Jared had been circulating through the superstitious minds had all but ceased. Dan True, riding past Corbin Christie's one day, held Jared at work in the field with Corbin. Riding up to them, True began to make plans with Jared for decorating his walls after harvest. I'll be glad to take the brush again, Dan True, Jared said with a smile, and glad to do your walls. If he does the like of mine, you'll have half the country coming to you just to see them, Corbin put in, for he had an honest pride in Jared's work and a loyalty to him. After the harvest, then, True said as he swung his horse around, I'll pay you well and give you all we can in the way of food and shelter while you're at work on the walls. But one might as well have said after doomsday as after harvest for the uncertainty of it. There was to be little harvest during that year of 1816. At least little of the harvest men had become accustomed to gathering. The harvest of other kinds might be garnered, but they would not be the sort men talked about. The last day of August had been hot and humid, like many other days that month. No farmer working in his fields in a desperate effort to spur the earth to further production had any indication that it would be the last day of such work. The storm that roared over that night was unexpected and utterly devastating. Wind lashed hail along its path. Rain edged with snow beat against house and barn. Jared listened to the storm that night as it hurled itself against the house. Laying there silently in the dark, he might well have shivered in the uncontrollable way he had shivered when he was a child, but he did not. He might well have feared what Corbin Christie would do, but fear had left his heart on an April night months ago, and faith had come in its place. There was no need to lie there and wonder what would happen. When morning came, it would show them what each must do. It was a ghastly sight that greeted New England farmers the next morning. Again, the land lay blighted by frost, and for the last time, there would be no more growing weather this year before winter set in. The turnips and apples were unharmed. The potatoes, though small, could be dug and stored away. Here and there, a handful of crops that had been spared by the vagaries of wind and frost could be harvested. But the corn had been cut off, and corn was the standby for the farmer. Some farmers were well enough off to command money to buy grain from other states for their stock and foodstuffs for their families, but less fortunate ones faced a grim winter. Corbin had stopped his ears that night at the noise of the storm, but the dull light of morning compelled him to look out over his fields. He did so in silence. Then he turned to Jared, and his words came from between set teeth. I'm through. With a string of oaths, he stamped out to the barn. When he returned, he said briefly, You fetch the lass. Tell her we're going west Wednesday. We're going west today. Corbin, think again, Jared begged. Corbin's face was terrible in its intensity. Tell her what I have said and bring her here. Jared knew there was nothing to say to Corbin when his mind was set. He left him, hoping that time would ease the man and his mind would change. Saddling the gray one, he rode down through the white death of the morning to the Dunkleys. Knocking lightly at the door, he entered the kitchen and found the family seated at the table. On it was a trencher of blackberries, and before each person, a plate of thin porridge. The children looked up and smiled at Jared. Eliza moved over and made a place for him without looking up. Jared saw the lines tears had made down her cheeks and knew she was just too proud to have him see that her spirit had been broken. Jeanette glanced up at Jared. Her eyes were wide with dark shadowed. Looming in them was the bewilderment A child fears when all the sources have failed to answer its questioning. John Dunkley put his head in his hands and said hoarsely, "Give us grace, Jared. I can't this morning." Jared laid one hand on Eliza's thin shoulder, the other on Delight's. Then he raised his eyes. "Father, we thank thee this morning for turnips and apples and wild berries, for pheasants and partridge and deer, for cold spring water and the warmth of a fire on a hearth. Above all, we thank thee for the love thou hast shown to each one of us. Make us strong in spirit and help us to trust thee during these hard times." "Amen," the children answered. "Amen," Jeanette responded, the sound like a sob. They picked up their spoons and began to eat. "I've not come to share your meal," Jared said, "but with a message from Corbin for Jeanette." He glanced up at her. "Corbin wants you, Jeanette. He's going west today. He wants that you should be ready to go with him in as short a time as possible." Jeanette went white. "No," she cried aloud. "I won't go." And terror was in her face. John Dunkley looked at her. "Jeanette, that's no way to speak of your husband's plans." "He's not my husband. Not yet." She shook her head and her hair tossed on her shoulders. "But you promised. You're promised," John reminded her. Jeanette looked wildly around the table, seeking someone to help her. Eliza laid her hand on the girl's arm. Then she turned to Jared. "She doesn't love him enough yet to go that far with him. Restrain him for a few days, Jared." "Restrain the tide," Jared said. "You know what he's like when his mind is set." Eliza looked at Jeanette. "Come, girl, eat what's on your plate, and go up the hill with Jared. Have a few words of your own with Corbin. Try to understand him." Let them be easy words, Jeanette, my dear," Eliza went on, "for it's a terrible thing when your man loses the fruit of the earth, and it's your place to comfort him." Jared and Jeanette walked slowly up the hill, leading the gray one between them. Words were not there for them, so they walked in silence. Corbin was waiting on the doorstone. Young Meteor was saddled and stood near. Jeanette walked towards Corbin slowly, while Jared took the gray one to the barn. Jared debated leaving them and going up the hill to the clearing, then thought better of it and stayed at hand. When the even tone of voices in conversation changed to the sharp pleading of a woman and the thunderous commands of a man, Jared came around to the front of the house. "I won't go," Jeanette was saying, stamping her foot and tossing her head. "Not this day, nor any other day. I'll stay here and keep your house and look after your creatures until you find your senses and come back." "Look after the creatures with a barn as empty as a blown seed pod?" Corbin roared. "But what will become of them cows, the sheep, if you leave them? Let them stray. Let them go back to the wilderness again. They are not but skin and bone now, and there isn't a cow that's giving milk." Jeanette's voice dropped sternly. "You can't abandon the creatures any more than you can your land." "Oh, can't I?" he said bitterly. "You're just afeard to go with me," he muttered with a snarl in his voice. Then Jeanette blazed. "Afeard, Corbin Christie? I've never known that word, and I never will. It's you who are afeard to stay and see the winter through." "Corbin, Jeanette," Jared stepped between them. "There's suffering enough in the world today. Must you speed it on the wind as well?" "She's bound to stay, and I'm bound she'll go," Corbin said darkly. "I'm bound I'll stay and care for his flock and his land until he comes back again." "It's madness," Corbin said. "The land is dead and the stock is dying." "It's kindness," she corrected him, and her eyes, no longer blazing, were like deep waters, mirroring his might. She reached forward and took his hand in hers. "I'll be waiting here for you, Corbin Christie, and I'll hold not against you." "If I go," he said impatiently, "and I'm going, I'll not come back for you or anyone." "But this house that you've made, Corbin," she began. "Let it stand," he said. "Let it rot," pushing her away with the hand she had been clasping. He turned and went toward young Meteor. "Corbin," Jared said, "you can curse the land and whip the hide off a beast, but it's a terrible thing to break a woman's heart. He looked straight into the man's hard white face, and for a moment there was no sound between them, but the sobbing of the girl huddled at the doorstone. "My mind is set," Corbin Christie said. "Goodbye, Jared Austen. You're the only man in the world I've not lost my temper with, and I don't want to now." His foot was in the stirrup. His heavy leg was flung over the saddle. "Corbin," Jared began, reaching for words to stay him. Corbin put his hand into his pocket and drew out 2 crumpled papers, which he pressed into Jared's hand. "I thought the lass might act like this. Good riddance to her." He swore a long oath. "What man wants a wife with a will like that?" Digging his heels into young Meteor's ribs, Corbin swung the rearing stallion around angrily. Now there was no sound on the morning air but the hard clapping of iron-shod hoofs on iron-fast ground. Jared watched Corbin racing down the road. If he could not go like that, he would go mad, Jared murmured. Leaving Jeanette to a sorrow she must face alone, Jared turned and went into the house. How strange the stenciled walls seemed now. All the little bells waiting to ring in happiness, and looking as if they might have to wait forever. Jared sat down at the table he and Corbin had made together, and opened the crumpled papers. One of them, written in Corbin's clumsy handwriting, Jared saw the words, "To whom it may concern, the lands that I cleared and the stock that I have raised I leave to Jared Austen. God knows what he, a painter, will do with them, but so be it. Corbin Christie." With fingers far from steady, Jared opened the other paper and read, "To whom it may concern, this house that I have made and decorated I leave to Jeanette Thaxter, to do with as she thinks best until the day of her death. Corbin Christie." Jared folded the papers in his hands and sighed. "God help the man with more strength of muscle than of spirit," he said. He rose from the table and went to the barn to see how the stock were faring. His creatures now, his acres, and he, whose sole possessions had been a stenciler's kit and a willing mare, wondered what he would do in this starvation year with such doubtful wealth.